Started in buy side in media, working for an agency, which was a global, really good place to start my career in terms of a really broad understanding of the media world. Then moved to the dark side, moved into, at the time, what was a radio company, Austereo, worked my way up from account management into sales management and then into kind of a head of sport and partnerships role, to where I finally landed over what has been a 10-year period with SCA, landing in a digital sales manager role, which is something I've really been chasing for some time, with some digital experience, which I think is just critical in obviously future-proofing my career, but also it's things set a light under me, the whole ability to be extremely accountable, extremely targeted, not something I was necessarily used to in kind of offline. And I'm 6 to 7 months into that journey and still absolutely in the ramp period, trying to learn as much as I can every day. I would say half of it is intrinsic motivation to want change, extrinsic opportunity, where, you know, I might have had the right conversation with a certain person. Like when I first moved from buy side to sell side, I think there was always an inclination internally, but I didn't necessarily know how to go about that. And I ended up getting poached. So it was really that combination of two worlds, or two forces coming together, which have led me down each kind of career path. Somewhat similar, where towards that kind of 2-year mark of each stage of my career here, there's been a point where I'm sort of like, well, what's next? And then the right conversation happens. Sometimes that's more driven by me. Sometimes that's driven by an opportunity that's opened up internally. In this instance, it was driven by COVID probably as much as anything. In that way, I suppose it's a little bit of the kind of the career gods looking after me, but there's always that internal drive to want to go after change, and more importantly, probably that growth mindset, I would say. I've always wanted to progress my skills and my experience. I've tried to change roles or evolve my role every 2 to 3 years, essentially. From a book and a range of podcasts from Jocko Willink, Extreme Ownership. And the basic concept is that as a leader, everything that happens in our teams, we are responsible for or can influence the outcomes on. And I think that's just such a nice starting point as a leader, because when you first get into leadership, sort of feels like the world's coming at you and your people are coming at you. You're all of a sudden responsible for everyone's outcomes. And half the time you don't know what to do with that. And the locus of control, I think, to understand that actually I have control, might not be the right word, but the ability to influence. You know, if someone's not performing your team, it's your responsibility to either coach them or kind of move them onto a role where they fit. And just that, I think, is a really good starting point for leaders moving into like early phases of leadership. I wish I knew that my career wasn't going to be linear, because I had expectations that it was absolutely going to be so linear. And while I was staying at the same company, I've kind of moved between all these different types of roles. I mean, first from buy side to sell side. And then from, once I was in this company, from main sales to, you know, specialist team in sport and partnerships, and now specialist team in digital. So I didn't expect that at the start of my career, and I wish I'd accepted that journey on the way through. If I had have known that at the start, that would have been probably quite valuable. Just the acceptance that that was my career. That was my destiny, I suppose. I think I grew up, perhaps we grew up in a really interesting transition time where it was kind of old form of leadership was what we grew up under. And then as we became leaders, that had become quite quickly made redundant. And all of a sudden we were required to learn a whole new style of leadership that we weren't necessarily conditioned for, and then execute that successfully. And I find that has been one of the greatest challenges. Like we're in a very lucky, privileged position in that sense. I think people kind of in our generation, that leadership did change, and that old autocratic, dictatorial style leadership, you know, in our lifetime changed guards. But with that came this challenge of, well, we haven't necessarily seen or been conditioned in that way, but we have to deliver something completely different to what we were used to. like leading millennials, it's such an easy. I'm quite passionate. Like watch a lot of cynic stuff on this whole piece, talking about how kind of leaders in our generation, I think we've got this opportunity to either really lean into leading millennials and now Gen Zs, or kind of dismiss it as a problem with them. And I think the joke's on those leaders that see it as a problem with the millennials, because when you look at your team now, like 80% of our teams are probably made up of millennials. So if we're going to be one of those kind of like Gen Ys or our generation that are saying, oh, the millennials are lazy or they're entitled or whatever, I think the joke's on us, because 80% of our team we can't engage with and we can't lead successfully. I think the mistake I made was probably not realizing that opportunity early enough. And that probably created some pretty negative leadership experiences, I think, initially in my leadership career. But thankfully, I've got awareness around that and made significant change. A couple of things referring to that growth mindset. I think I've just always had that. Whether that's been always healthy for me, I'm not sure, because it's a bit of a balance between kind of acceptance and being present and that growth mindset. I've constantly had to balance that. And then I would say utilizing coaches and therapists. Actually, I think I've probably learned more about leadership from my therapist than any other source, any other kind of single source, because it's obviously ultimately about humans, those or deeply human needs and emotions. And for that reason, I think coaches and therapists have a lot to teach us. Yeah. So that would be a combination of those two things, I would say, secret to my success.